Thanks very much, Connor, and it's a really great pleasure that I'm here today to present the work that Oxera has done on the occasion of the Sutton Trust's 20th anniversary. As we heard already this morning, a charity with a very strong mission and also the aim to be a do tank, and I think that's evidenced by when I first approached Sutton Trust to talk about the possibility that we could help think about the question of, if one is successful with social mobility, what are the gains to the economy in the broader sense in terms of productivity? Then I was reaching out internally to see who at the firm would be interested in working on the project. Who pops up but a Sutton Trust alumni who's been on one of the summer schools. And I think the two levels of being here today talking about the big questions and influencing government to ensure the policy framework is there, and at the same time making a real difference to the lives of people and that network that then spreads over that 20 years throughout the economy. And last week, the session we had that I was invited to about the cohort going to the US, which is a very impressive program that the Sutton Trust one's facilitating UK students getting access to the top US schools. I think you see the benefits of that will be feeding into the productivity message that I'll be giving today. We've been working over the last year, again with today's event in mind, looking at what the economic benefits that will accrue in a more socially mobile society. So in a sense, we haven't been focusing so much on how we're going to achieve that change, but asking what's the prize when we do achieve it, and thinking about where those benefits are coming from. So everyone in this room, and we heard from Justine Greening about how social mobility is widely perceived to be intrinsically a good thing. Decoupling an individual's prospects from their social status or their family background is a key pillar of fairness and of social justice, something that you read about or hear about in your philosophy classes, read about in opinion polls. But what's less well understood is the role that it plays in boosting productivity and economic output. Now, social mobility could have benefits through a wide range of channels. It could be through decreasing inequality, and there are arguments that can affect productivity. It can be through increasing workforce participation by encouraging people, particularly women, into the workforce, but also people in our society who otherwise would find themselves not having good access to the workforce. There's also the line that we've heard a bit about this morning about improving social cohesion, reducing the us and them mentality that I think we still see in Ben's presentation about becoming an even more prevalent aspect of the young in our society. Now, how that translates into productivity, that was actually something when we began the project that we thought we would have a go at trying to quantify. As we worked through, we thought, that one's really hard, and I will pass it over to the academics in the room to think about that. But I think we started from the premise that in addition to those features that I'm going to talk about in more detail now, actually having a more socially cohesive society is likely to have productivity benefits in terms of making your economy work well. So we did find that more mobile societies, by looking across European economies, are linked to more productive work and better economic performance. And what do we believe is driving that? Well, more mobile societies uncover talent more effectively. Greater mobility means that the talents of all young people are recognised and they're nurtured, and that the barriers to access to some jobs are reduced. These entry barriers exist potentially for a number of reasons. Perhaps the more obvious short-term ones are biases in recruitment processes, but it also is the inequality in educational opportunities or the lack of aspiration that you can see in less socially mobile societies. So in that situation, it's more likely that a job will be filled by someone. In a more socially mobile economy, it's more likely that that job will be filled by somebody with the highest level of potential to perform well in that job. So rather than someone who may be less well suited, but for whatever reason, say better connected, has been able to get that opportunity. So this better matching, which is the element that we've focused on for the quantification, means that the average productivity of a job should increase as employees are on average better matched to the job they are doing. And that's also not just about always getting access to the top of the value chain of jobs, but across the board ensuring that individuals are well matched. So as part of this project, we also looked at how social mobility in the UK has evolved and what the gap is with other neighbouring countries in order to use that to try to scale what the opportunities are for the UK in improvements in social mobility. On both counts, we found that there is certainly scope for the UK to improve its performance, and that's in line with certainly the picture that Ian just painted and other work in the area. So our research suggests that if we could improve our mobility, we would observe significantly higher levels of productivity. Raising our performance to the Western European average could result, in the long run, in the UK being better off by around 2% of GDP, around 39 billion. That's the bit that we identified from just matching people to the opportunities available. And that's not a very ambitious target to improve the UK to the Western European average. And I'll present some of the numbers if we could be more ambitious about the scale of change that we could effect. So first, just a few words on what is social mobility. I think we heard that from Ben, that actually when you look at a snapshot from an opinion poll where you've asked people what's happened to them over time, that may not tell you the whole story about social mobility, because inherent in a measure of social mobility, a more socially mobile society, as shown on the left of the slide, is that some people may be going down while others are going up. So social mobility is about whether or not your outcomes as a descendant or an adult child, how linked they are to the outcomes of your parents. And so you need to have, and this is one of the challenges with doing research in this area, because you need to have good data over really long periods of time that link adult outcomes to the outcomes of their parents. And those data sets are increasingly being developed, but they are hard to come by. So our core metric, which we've measured, is looking at descendant outcomes in terms of both income and wages, and also aspirations, and linking that to outcomes of parents defined both on income levels of the parents and also occupation, so to capture the two sides of social positioning that we've heard people discuss. So we use both of those. And for the cross-country comparisons, we looked at descendants' earnings to assess the productivity assessment. But when looking at what's been happening over the UK over the last 20, 30 years, we actually looked at children's aspirations at the age of 16. So that enables us to tap in a bit, to have a look at what's going on for children at this age group, which gives us a bit more of a foresight into whether we think improvements are coming, because obviously it's important to have children aspiring to further education in order to achieve that. As this schematic shows, the more mobile a society is, the less good a predictor what your parents' education or income will be of your own outcomes. So against this, what do we see about how the UK fares? Yeah, not so well. So, which is a sign that there's still plenty to play for. The UK lags behind on social mobility. Now, this is a snapshot of the UK's performance as compared with other European countries in the recent past. And it shows a measure of wage persistence. So this is across all people. The results are stronger if you focus just on sons rather than sons and daughters. And it shows the gap between the income of those whose fathers reached tertiary education is 47% higher than those whose fathers did not go to upper secondary, so finished at the age of 16. It's a very significant wage gap, and this is data from about 10 years ago. It's the latest that we have, but it still shows that there's a really significant gap, and that in the ranking of European countries, the UK is towards the lower end of social mobility in that. So as I said, we also, in looking at the UK outcomes on social mobility since the 1980s, we looked there on a complementary measure to one based on income outcomes and wage outcomes, to looking at what children aged 16 say about their aspirations to continue education. And we saw how that is linked to their parents' income and occupation. And what we found there were some signs that did improve towards the end of the 20th century, between, in studies that were done in the 80s compared with those done in the early 2000s. There looks like there was some improvement based on social mobility measured on parents' income, but on parents' occupation, even that result is not clear. What you see for this century is no significant improvement in children's aspirations, in more mobility around children's aspirations. So you see that similar, the results are in the full report, which is in your pack, showing that there's no significant improvement in children's in the mobility around children's aspirations. So that does say that all the policies that we've been talking about today, there's still a lot of work to do. It's not as if that looking at that snapshot of children who are coming out of education over the last 10 years and now have a very different mindset to suggest that this problem is going to disappear over the next 20 years. It still is something that we need to keep front of mind. So with that backdrop, our work then focused on answering the question of what would be the economic benefit to society of improving mobility and opening up this access. Now, this is a question that actually Sutton Trust and BCG have looked at over in the last decade, where that work focused on the potential benefits arising from the improved educational outcomes that would come through better access. And so the angle that we have taken in quantifying productivity benefits has focused on the benefits from unlocking the hidden talent in society, rather than just an overall educational enhancement. So how does this better matching work? We found that creating the opportunity for talent across the social spectrum to be recognised, developed and then utilised well improves productivity. One of the main reasons for this is that in a society where education and employment opportunities are largely determined by an individual's family background rather than their innate abilities, it's likely they'll be less well matched to the jobs they do, as some of the talent in your economy is going to therefore be underutilised. So as employees, where their skills match well, are likely to be more productive than those where that doesn't occur. And so our prior is that socially mobile societies are going to be more productive in a level sense. And so here, a simple visual to illustrate that, which is just the most able person for a particular role, the person in the red jacket in the picture. On the left-hand side, you actually don't see that person. When an employer is going to look, they're just not even looking. So they're selecting from a subsample of the actual potential. And if you manage to make the playing field level, then the person who would be selected would be more appropriate for that role. And again, as we said, that could be because they don't think to put themselves forward for the job, that they haven't acquired the right skills, or that when they come forward for that job, they aren't selected for various recruitment biases as part of the application. So in order to quantify this effect, we examined outcomes across a range of European countries using OECD data from 2005. Now, there are always challenges in identifying effects between social mobility and these economic outcomes like productivity. Social mobility, as we said, it's something that changes slowly over a really long time. Productivity measures vary and are driven also by a range of other policies in any country. And when you're doing cross-country comparisons, there are always many other explanations for why one country's productivity is different from another. So the way I position this work is just to say there are strong indications from the work that we have done around social mobility driving enhanced productivity. And when you look, we found significant correlations across these OECD countries, just at the highest level of looking at how countries with higher social mobility and how that affects their productivity benefits. And those numbers were quite significant if you then said, what if the UK was to move to the average, again, the Western average performance, just from that, the correlation between social mobility and productivity, you could be talking about really significant improvements in productivity, around 9%. Now, those aren't the numbers we've been focusing on because we're aware that at this point, the data isn't there to do the full set of controls you would want to do to be sure that what you're capturing there is purely social mobility. We did do some testing of that. We controlled for things like research and development as potential explanations. But what you really need, and this is a plea for us all to support the gathering of this information, the OECD has had this on its radar, and we encourage them to continue to develop those data sets. You need the same sort of analysis over time so that we can use both the cross-section and panel time series element in order to be able to identify this better. But there may be these other drivers that explain both the higher productivity and the higher social mobility. But as I say, we controlled for research and development, and we also, in the full paper, we look at clusters within Europe to show that this is an effect that's being driven by something very different. So it's not just being driven by the Scandinavian countries being very different from Portugal. That because even if you look at clusters where you get more like countries, northern, southern, Western European economies, you still see a very strong correlation between social mobility and productivity in those economies. But for the numbers that we're presenting today, what we have focused on is the matching element. And the way we did that was we then went to explore in detail how improved matching, what element of overall productivity gains could be attributed to that. We found a significant relationship across the European sample we had between social mobility and improved matching. And we used for that some ILO information, so International Labour Office information on how well matched people are to their jobs. And that was also looking both at overskilling and underskilling at the occupation level. And we then relied on other work by McGowan and Andrews that has done a detailed study of what are the benefits in productivity gains for countries that have improved matching. And that showed that for 10% improvement in matching led to 0.8% improvement in productivity levels. So putting those two bits together, the link between how more socially mobile economies are better matched and then how that better matching leads to productivity gains, we come up with the estimates that we're presenting here about how much benefit there is to an economy from improved social mobility through the mechanism of just matching people better to the jobs. And now, I think this is not to say it doesn't incorporate in that the fact that with that better matching there is some improved skill acquisition of those individuals. So as you see, if we take the approach of saying, what if all we did was we're able to move the UK to the Western European average? So that's not even including the Scandinavian countries' social mobility levels, which are obviously much higher. And we see that those are the numbers that say a 2% improvement in GDP. And now, just a moment to say that is a long-term estimate. We're doing cross-country analysis. So this is like saying if we could move UK to that equilibrium position. So this is going to take time. It's going to take time because you need those individuals to acquire the education, to be more socially mobile, to run their lives through being productive in the workforce. But at the end of that process, you see a 2% increase in equilibrium GDP as the sort of estimates that we're coming up with. If you said that we would move to the average for the Europe as a whole, that's 50 billion. And if you were as ambitious as to say, could we get to best-in-class social mobility, looking at some of the Nordic countries, then you see the potential for really significant improvements in productivity above 130 billion. As I said, this estimate focuses solely on that link between mobility and matching, and the price could be even higher when you take into account other elements of productivity gains that may come from social mobility. So I think this work shows how important social mobility can be in terms of economic performance. Identifying and attracting young people with the highest potential is critical for all businesses in the UK, and particularly service-led businesses, something I understand very well from running a consulting business here in Europe, UK and across in continental Europe. And drawing on the largest possible pool of talent ensures a diverse, skilled workforce able to operate internationally. And again, something that is increasingly going to be important for the UK as in the challenges we no doubt will face over the next decade in terms of being more outward focused more export-led. Our findings show that social mobility is good for businesses in the UK, for building productivity, and good for society. I think this area is definitely worthy of further research to emphasise these benefits. The work that we've done has built very much on literature that is out there showing how important social mobility is in terms of these ways of unlocking talent, quantifying that and showing how that actually delivers benefits to society can then underpin why these policies are definitely worthy of investment. And at a time when the UK is facing such a productivity challenge, improving social mobility can be seen to be something that's not just a question of equity, it's also an economic imperative.